Imagine being stuck with a job that has no pay, no benefits, and even when you die, you still have to clock in the next day. That's the fate of heroes in this world, because no matter how many times they die in battle, they are constantly resurrected and forced to continue fighting. Dada is one such hero, and he is currently running through the forest while being chased by a group of knights. The knights are chasing him because just stole a coffin from them, but there's also happens to be a group of demon fairies in the area, and the fairies are much scarier than the knights are. While the knights are being turned into monster food, Dada tries to make his escape, but he's got short, stubby legs, so he doesn't make it far before one of the fairies catches up and knocks him to the ground. Dada starts freaking out and yells for help because he doesn't want to become a snack, and luckily for him, at the last second, his companion, Xylo, comes falling from the sky and stabs the monster in the head. Dada is grateful to be alive, but he apparently got impaled while he was running for his life, and it hurts really bad, so he's not ready to deal with all that. He tells Xylo to just kill him because the church will resurrect him back at base anyway, but Xylo socks him in the face and tells him to stop thinking like that. The church doesn't care if they die since they can always drag their souls out of hell and put them in new bodies, but after each death and resurrection, the memories of your soul are slowly eroded, and eventually, you'd forget who you are. Dada realizes that Xylo is right, so he agrees to let Xylo treat his wound, no matter how painful it is. A little while later, Dada is all patched up, but just then, Xylo notices the coffin over there, and it all finally clicks that Dada did something really dumb. He was being chased because he stole this coffin, but Xylo doesn't understand why Dada would even bother stealing something like this from the knights in the first place. Dada apologizes and says he's not sure why he did it. He just saw the knights transporting the coffin and thought, I could probably steal that. And before he knew it, he was running through the forest with the coffin. It's taking every bit of restraint in Xylo's body to not slit Dada's throat after a stunt like that, but Dada begs him to let it go because worst case scenario, they can just return the coffin, everything will go back to normal. It's not like things could get much worse for them anyway. However, when they head over to the coffin to check it out, they realize that their situation just got a lot worse. It was already bad enough that Dada stole a coffin, but there's a girl's body inside it, and she looks like she's really important, so HQ is going to be really mad about this. Dada assumes she must be a royal, but Xylo can tell that the girl isn't even human, she's a goddess. Dada doesn't believe him at first since he recalls that goddesses were weapons created to defeat demon lords, and they always looked like giant lumps of iron, not little girls, but Xylo is certain that this girl is one of them. Just then, the two hear the sounds of a horn nearby, so they go to check it out, but Xylo tells Dada to leave the goddess behind. The sound came from a group of knights in the valley close by, and they are absolutely getting massacred out there. And the whole time, Xylo's watching while thinking, damn, that's crazy. Couldn't be me though. The knights were careless during their advance, which is why they fell for a fairy ambush so easily. But even if it's their own fault, Xylo can't just watch while they die. Personally, he doesn't care about the knights, but there are a few of them still alive down there. And his official mission this time was to ensure that at least half of the royal knights in the area survive, so saving these guys would help him reach his quota. However, just as he's about to jump down, he and Dada hear a voice from behind them. It's the goddess girl from the coffin, and she seems to be alive and well, but seeing her just makes Xylo really annoyed. She overheard what he said about saving the knights, and she thinks it's a good goal, so she offers to use her power to guarantee his victory. But in exchange, he will have to pay a high price. She wants him to call her a good girl and pat her head after she's done. Apparently, goddesses are designed with an overwhelming desire for affection and recognition, probably as a means to control them, but Teorita doesn't seem to care and says her purpose is to assist her chosen master in any way she can, and that means she is willing to sacrifice her life to help Xylo if necessary. But that lack of self-worth is part of the reason he hates goddesses so much. He jumps down from the cliff and says he will handle it on his own because he doesn't want to rely on a goddess's power, but he's still going to need Dada's observation skills. So he asks him to point in the direction of the knights. Dada really doesn't want to get involved, but he's got quotas to meet, so he has no choice but to comply. As Xylo is sliding down the cliff towards the knights, he suddenly realizes that Teorita is right behind him, and he asks why she's here. She says it's obvious that she wanted to protect her knight, but he says he doesn't need her help, and as soon as he spots a fairy, he imbues a dagger with light and heat magic before throwing it and causing a massive explosion, while Kivia is just doing her best to keep up. By the end of the battle, all the monsters have been dealt with, but while the knights were initially grateful for the help, once they realize that he's one of the condemned heroes, their attitude completely changes. They think it's a disgrace that they were saved by someone like Xylo, and one of them even points a sword at him, which seems pretty dumb since they all know Xylo is the strongest person here. Just then, Xylo receives word that the main Holy Knight unit has decided to make a final stand near the river to hold off the advancing demons, which in theory sounds like it makes sense. But if you hadn't already noticed, most knights are completely useless against the demons, so there's no way they would be able to hold off an entire army of monsters. It's practically a death sentence, and normally Xylo wouldn't care about what happens to a bunch of stuck-up knights, but if too many of them die all at once, then the current hero's squad will be deemed a failure, and he will be tortured the next time he's resurrected. He can't let that happen, so he prepares to go save the main unit before they are completely wiped out. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the squad led by Commander Kivia has just encountered the demon army, so they prepare their lightning spears, and to their credit, they do manage to take out the first few waves of monsters, but there are still a lot of them left, so sooner or later, they are going to be overrun. Fortunately, Xylo arrived just in time to save them. Well, actually, a bunch of knights have already died, so I wouldn't say it's just in time, but at least he's here. And he's much more skilled than any of these scrubs, so he is easily able to handle the current wave of monsters, and the knights are all left speechless by the incredible display of power. Commander Kivia approaches Xylo, and while she is grateful for his help, she is also quite suspicious of the fact that an unknown warrior just appeared on the battlefield out of nowhere. Just then, Rita catches up to Xylo, and she's upset that he tried to ditch her again. Kivia recognizes Rita as the goddess that was meant to be transported to the Gultual, and now she's even more suspicious of Xylo because she thinks he must have attacked the escort group to steal Rita. Xylo explains that the knights who were escorting Rita are probably dead, but that it wasn't his fault, and besides, he has no interest in forming a covenant with a goddess. Kivia is still really confused and demands a proper explanation, but as much as Xylo would love to fill her in on all the details, they don't have time for that since the Demon Lord is closing in. As the Demon Lord advances, the forest around it becomes corrupted with demon blight, turning the wildlife into monsters, and seeing so many demons approach all at once is unbelievably terrifying for the troops. So they lose their nerve and impulsively fire, even though Kivia warns them not to. It turns out that that was one of the worst mistakes that they could have made, because this Demon Lord has a force field that not only blocks attacks, it also reflects the damage back at them, so a large portion of the Holy Knights are wiped out. With the demons still advancing, Xylo tells Kivia that this battle is a lost cause, so they should all retreat while they still have the chance. However, even though Kivia knows he's right, she still refuses to retreat. Xylo tells her that she'll die if she stays here, and the only reason he came was because he has orders to support their retreat. As soon as Kivia hears him say that, she realizes that he must be one of the heroes who was sent from headquarters, so she tells him that as the commander on site, she has final say on what the troop does, and for the sake of their honor, they will sacrifice their lives on the battlefield today. However, Xylo couldn't care less about Kivia's stupid honor because he can't stand people who willingly throw their lives away like this. But just as he and Kivia were in the middle of arguing, the Demon Lord suddenly begins its attack. Dozens of egg sacs rain down on the shore, and in an instant, the entire troop is overwhelmed by monsters. Xylo does his best to keep them at bay, but he's running out of daggers to throw, and the situation isn't getting any better. All of a sudden, a few of the monsters make their way over to the lightning cannons and end up causing a massive explosion on the battlefield that knocks Xylo out. By the time Xylo regains consciousness, the only thing he sees is Rita lying on the ground across from him, and she is pleading with him to use her power because it's the only way to save the people here from dying horrible deaths. Xylo knows she's right, but he swore to himself that he would never use the power of a goddess again, so instead, he starts calling out to Kivia and yells for her to form a covenant with Rita in his place. However, a moment later, he sees Kivia's bloody chest plate rolling across the ground, and in all likelihood, she's a puddle of mush on the battlefield by now, so it looks like he has no choice now. He tells Rita he's willing to form the contract, and she's glad to hear it, so she's about to start explaining the process to him, but he says he already knows how it's done. He makes a cut on the back of his hand and presents it to Rita as an offering, and as soon as she kisses his blood, he feels the connection between himself and Rita form. Now that the pact has been formed, Xylo is able to draw out Rita's power, so she asks him what he'd like to do first. He says a good place to start would be taking out the fairies that are currently surrounding them, so Rita happily obliges. As the goddess of swords, Rita is able to summon countless weapons and rain them down upon her enemies, so in no time, she has completely wiped out the monster army. Rita is really proud of herself and tells Xylo he can start praising her now, but he says her reward is going to have to wait because there's still another wave of monsters headed this way. He picks up one of the swords that Rita created and hurls it at a monster, and it looks like his power still works with the swords Rita creates, so he asks her to give him some more ammo. Bit by bit, he chips away at the remaining demons as the Holy Knights watch in amazement. At one point, Xylo manages to find Kivia and she's surprised to see that she's still alive, but it would have been nice to know before he formed the contract, but it is what it is. He tells Kivia that she needs to take her men and hunt down any demons they manage to survive his explosions before they do more damage. Kivia is offended that a condemned hero would dare to give her orders, but Xylo reminds her that this is a matter of life or death, so she needs to put her pride aside and do what's necessary to survive. He may be a condemned hero, but he has no intention of dying here, and he doesn't want to see anyone else die here either, which is why he's going to take out the Demon Lord before that happens. He lifts Rita onto his shoulders and prepares to charge at the Demon Lord. She asks if he wants her to use her powers now, but he says they need to get a little closer first, so for now, she should just focus on giving him swords to throw. Once they finally get close enough, he asks Rita to create a giant sword for him to use, and as he launches it into the body of the Demon Lord, it results in a massive explosion that carves a hole through its body. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to kill it outright, so the Demon Lord sprouts several tendrils and attacks them, forcing Xylo to defend Rita with his body. By the time Xylo wakes up, he finds Rita standing over his body, and Dada is here too since he finally got back from whatever the hell he was doing while Xylo was risking his life. At first, Xylo was mad, but then he noticed that Dada stole something again. Dada tries to defend himself and says it was just lying around near base camp, so he thought he might as well take it, and for once, Dada's grubby thieving fingers actually paid off. This thing is a scorched earth seal, essentially a really powerful bomb, and Xylo just thought of a plan to use it to take out the Demon Lord for good. He sets it on a timer and jumps into the air before kicking the bomb straight into the Demon Lord's wound, and before it goes off, he grabs Rita and Dada and gets out of the blast radius as fast as possible. The bomb eventually goes off, and the Demon Lord's body is completely destroyed, so the battle is finally over, and Rita says she wants to be praised for doing a good job. But as he's about to pat her on the head, he suddenly has flashbacks to a previous goddess he had a contract with, and he can't bring himself to do it. Just then, Kivia shows up, and even though Xylo basically saved everyone here, she points her sword at him and says he will be punished for acting on his own and forming a covenant with the goddess Rita without permission. Rita tries to vouch for Xylo and tells Kivia that he is the most worthy knight she could ever ask for. But Kivia tells her she's only saying that because she doesn't know the crime that Xylo committed that got him sentenced to be a hero. Rita asks what the crime was since she's sure it couldn't have been that bad, but then Kivia explains that Xylo used to be a holy knight, and he was charged after killing the goddess he had previously formed a covenant with, and Rita is shocked to hear this. At least, that's the official story that was announced, but in reality, what happened was much different. On the day of Xylo's sentencing, he was brought before the court where the Inquisitor tells him he has been accused of killing his goddess, Senerva. Xylo tries to explain that he had received an order to go into battle with her, but the promised reinforcements never arrived, and Senerva was forced to use up all of her energy. When a goddess uses up all her energy, they become vulnerable and susceptible to demon blight, so he chose to put Senerva out of her misery before she could become corrupted. This was a completely valid reason, but the Inquisitor accused him of spouting blasphemy against the goddesses and ordered the guards to stop him from saying another word. Xylo desperately tried to explain that if a goddess becomes corrupted, it could give birth to a demon possessing goddess powers, and that would lead to the demise of humanity. But as he looks up, that's when he realized the Inquisitor doesn't care about the truth at all, and this whole thing had been a setup from the very beginning. He doesn't know who orchestrated it, or where they are, but he swore then and there that no matter how many lifetimes it may take, he will make them pay. A few days after the first mission ended, Xylo is sleeping in his tent back at base camp when Tiorita suddenly wakes him up. He tells her not to bother him since he wants to get more sleep, but he also asks her why she's still here, despite the fact that the knights already told her everything about his past. Tiorita admits that she was initially concerned when she learned that Xylo killed a goddess before, but she firmly believes that he must have had a good reason for doing so. He rolls over in bed and tells her that it doesn't matter what his reason was, because at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that he killed a goddess. He then tells Tiorita that the pact they formed can be dissolved with mutual consent, so all she needs to do is say the word and their bond will be severed, but Tiorita absolutely refuses. She says Xylo is her one and only knight, and no matter what, she's got to stick by his side until the end. Just then, Xylo receives a message from Venetum telling him that they have been assigned on another mission, and they have to head out immediately. Winter has already begun to set in this area, and Tiorita is amazed by how pretty everything looks when it's frozen, but as cute as her curiosity may be, it's also really annoying. So Xylo and Venetum get sick of her constant questions really quickly. Meanwhile, back at HQ, Kivia received a mission of her own, and according to her superior, she is to suspend the original transport mission and head to the Z1 tunnels to help clear them. She asks if this means those tunnels have been overrun with demon blight as well. So her superior explains that since the Fourth War and the appearance of Demon Blight number 1, a large section of their forests have been corrupted, and over the course of 20 years, humanity has lost a lot of its habitable land, so they cannot let the blight spread any further. To ensure the success of the mission, the hero team has been sent to assist the mission, so Kivia says she will head out to meet up with them immediately. But before she leaves, her superior asks her to greet High Priest Marlin for him if she happens to run into him over there. That night, Terida and the others are camping out in the woods when she notices that she hasn't seen Dada for a while now. Xylo explains that Dada is currently in the repair shop after Xylo beat him up a bit too hard for all the trouble he caused, so he won't be available for a while. King tells Xylo that as one of his subjects, he needs to be more careful with the way he treats his allies, and Xylo half-heartedly agrees with him so they can move on with this conversation. Terida gets close to Xylo and asks him why he keeps calling that dude King, so he explains that King is a hero like him, and he genuinely believes that he is the king of the Federated Kingdom, so it's easier to deal with him if you play along. As for the reason he was forced to become a hero, King launched a large-scale terrorist attack against the kingdom to quote-unquote reclaim his throne, so he's a bona fide terrorist. Terida wasn't expecting the reason to be so serious, so she tries to change the subject and asks who that guy over there is. Xylo informs her that that's Tatsuya, but Terida thinks it's pretty weird that he's just staring up at the sky like that. Xylo has no idea why he does that either, but as he explained earlier, when a hero dies and is resurrected, they lose part of their memory and personality, so if they aren't careful, all of them will end up like Tatsuya one day. The next morning, they finally arrive at the village, but the villagers don't seem very happy despite the fact that help has arrived. Honestly, the fact that there are even still villagers in the area strikes Venetum as odd since normally they would have all been evacuated by now, but it looks like there are a lot of holdouts for some reason. Xylo walks up to one of the shops to gather some information, and the lady is initially wary after realizing that Xylo is a hero, but he assures her she has nothing to fear. He tells her he and his friends are just here to get the tunnels under control, but the lady doesn't think it will do much good since the village has already lost a lot of people to the blight. She then walks away without giving Xylo a chance to ask for directions toward the tunnel, but just when he was about to give up, a little girl gets his attention and points him in the direction of the tunnel. Xylo thanks her and starts walking away, but before he could get far, she asks him if he is going to save her father. Xylo remains silent and continues walking away because while he does feel bad for her, if her father were in those tunnels, then he's probably long dead by now, and he doesn't want to give her any false hope. Xylo later regroups with the others and they go over all the information that they've gathered so far. The Z1 tunnels produce good quality iron, which is used as a catalyst in sacred seals to be used against the fairies, which is why the military has poured a lot of money into developing this area. But it ended up becoming infested with the fairies, so it's not of much use right now. Terida asks Xylo what a sacred seal is since she doesn't know much about them, so he explains that sacred seals are what allow him to fight the way he does. That said, he doesn't know much about them either, so he asks King to explain since this is his area of expertise. King is a genius when it comes to sacred seals, and he's able to perform tunings that would usually take dozens of people all by himself. But sacred seals alone are not enough to defeat their enemies. As they approach the tunnel, Venetum informs everyone that about a month ago, the villagers reported that a bunch of the cave miners got turned into fairies in there and started attacking people. The exact details on the incident are a bit fuzzy, but they were able to discover that Blight number 51 is being referred to as Lotus. Their mission today is to excavate a direct path for the Holy Knights to use to attack, so all of them are forced to head in and deal with the demons. However, when Venetum says all of them, what he actually means is all of them except him, because as the commander of this team, he needs to stay back in the city to coordinate the mission. Xylo knows that's just an excuse he came up with to avoid doing any actual work, but Venetum has already begun running away, and it's not like he would have been much help in there anyway. The group proceeds without him. For the next few hours, Xylo and Tatsuya spend their time digging through the tunnels to create an opening for the knights, while King sits at his workbench, carving sacred seals into the digging equipment to make them stronger. Terida wants to contribute as well, so she asks him if she can help with the digging, but Xylo rejects her offer since he doesn't want a goddess wasting her stamina on a task like this. Just then, Kivia shows up, and she mentions that higher-ups told her about how Dada was the one who stole Terida's coffin, not Xylo. So this is her way of apologizing for accusing Xylo without actually apologizing. She asks him why he didn't explain himself to her back then, but he says it would have been pointless because Kivia wouldn't have believed him anyway. He's right about that, but to avoid any further misunderstandings, Kivia asks Xylo to explain all relevant details to her on future missions. Xylo agrees to her request, but he doesn't see what good it would do when they were given a mission like this. Kivia asks what he means by that, so Xylo points out that this is a fairy-infested mine, and most of the time, the church would just ignore it, especially with winter on the way. There's nothing of value here, so Xylo can't figure out what the goal here is, and he's starting to think they might be planning to do something to Tiarita. Kivia tells Xylo to stop making baseless conspiracy theories and get back to work, but Xylo can tell that even she doesn't know what the mission's goal is. After a few more hours of digging, Xylo finally breaks through to one of the caverns, but he is immediately confronted by demonized centipedes, so Tatsuya jumps into action and begins chopping them to pieces. Xylo tries to help as well, but his explosions are a little too risky in confined spaces like this cave, so he's going to have to leave this one to Tatsuya. Fortunately, Tatsuya is an absolute beast with that axe of his, and it doesn't take long before he has eradicated all the demons. Though, he's probably going to need some time to rest after all that work. Now that the demons are gone, King uses some light magic to expose the demon-blighted areas, and as much would have it, there's a large section of the floor that is unaffected, so they decide to set the base of operations up here. Tiarita asks Xylo if she can at least help with this, and since it's not dangerous, he decides to let her do what she wants. He explains that the stakes are used to prevent the demon blight from extending to the areas that they have marked out, so if she wants to help, she should go put one over there, and Tiarita is ecstatic that she finally gets to do something. A little while later, the demon-blighted section has been completely sealed off, and Tiarita asks Xylo to reward her for her effort. She did do a good job, so he says he will praise her a little once they get back, but Tiarita still wants to accomplish more, so she asks him if they can go deeper into the mine and defeat the demon lord that's spreading all this blight. Xylo tells her there's no way he's doing that since, for one, he doesn't want to deal with the hassle, and two, it would go against the orders that they were given. He tells her she should go join the Royal Knights if she wants to fight demon lords all the time, but Tiarita doesn't appreciate how dismissive he is being. She has already sworn to stay by his side till the end, but she needs him to let her do important stuff as well, otherwise, she will never be satisfied. Just then, King receives a distress signal from the knights over the comms, and it says they are currently being attacked near the cave's entrance, so they need backup. Kivia and the rest of the knights charge into battle against the blighted humans, but with this many, it's only a matter of time before they get overwhelmed. By the time Xylo and the others arrive, a few of the knights have already been killed, so he wants to save them as soon as possible. But before that, Tiarita has a question. She asks him if those fairies used to be human, and Xylo confirms this, but unfortunately, there's no way to cure them once they reach this stage, so the best they can do is put a stop to their suffering. Several minutes later, the battle is over, and a few of the knights are taking it pretty hard because they didn't expect to have to kill human fairies. Just then, Xylo notices a guy hiding behind some crates over in the corner, and apparently, he's a survivor who didn't manage to get out of the cave during the initial infestation. That means there are other survivors still trapped in there, and King thinks it is imperative that they be saved as soon as possible, but Kivia says that would be impossible because they aren't equipped to launch a rescue mission right now. To take such a risky move would result in the deaths of many holy knights. However, it's not like she wants to leave those civilians behind, so she asks Xylo what he thinks of the situation. If they were to embark on a rescue mission, what would their chances of success be? Xylo plainly tells her that most of the knights would die, because fighting against fairies while defending civilians in these narrow corridors would be a death sentence. Just then, Priest Marlin shows up, and he tells Kivia that there's no need to ask for advice from a man like Xylo because they already have their orders. They are to blow up the entrance and seal it off to make sure no fairies can escape. But upon hearing this, King flies into a rage because he can't believe Marlin would intentionally sacrifice innocent civilians, but Marlin couldn't care less. In fact, he's enjoying the sights of King like this because he knew him before he is sentenced to be a hero. Xylo doesn't like the idea of letting civilians die either, but he doesn't want to take the risk of going to save them. However, when he sees Tiarita face, he is reminded of that girl from before and how sad she looked, so he changes his mind and says he will personally save the people. They have already finished setting up the Knight's base, so their official mission has been completed and there's nothing stopping them from saving people in their spare time. But as Tiarita is celebrating the fact that she is finally going to be able to do something heroic, Xylo tells her she has to stay here. After all, he can't risk letting her die over something like this. The villagers are currently trapped in a section of the mine, desperately trying to fend off the fairies. But just as they were about to be devoured, Xylo arrives and blows them up. Tatsuya then jumps in and begins laying waste to the monsters without mercy, and he is very efficient at what he does. One of the worms attempts to trap him in a web, but his instincts are too sharp for that, so he turns around and slices the web to bits before attacking the rest of the monsters, and a few minutes later, he and Xylo are pretty much done, but that doesn't mean it's over yet. The workers may be safe for now, but getting out of this cave is going to be a whole separate challenge, so Xylo asks King to carve sacred seals on their tools to give them a fighting chance. Sacred seals operate using luminescence as their power source, so they can usually be recharged with sunlight, but down here, there's no sunlight to speak of, so these ones will only have a few uses before they run out of energy. Xylo's sacred seals work the same way, but his body is able to store several times the normal amount of luminescence of an ordinary man, which is why he has been able to maintain his destructive power down here. Even so, his power can still run out, so they all need to make it out of the cave as soon as possible, otherwise, they'll be sitting ducks. They prepare to begin the journey to the exit, but all of a sudden, the ground begins to shake beneath their feet and dozens of fairies surround them all at once. This is the worst timing imaginable, but they've got no choice in the situation. So Xylo tells everyone they need to form a defense line and hold their position for as long as possible. He then starts blowing up a few of the fairies, but the workers are too terrified to fight since they've never had to deal with things like this before. Unfortunately, they don't have much of a choice, so Xylo tells them they need to defend themselves or they're going to become fairy lunch. Meanwhile, on the night's end, they are all just chilling at the edge of the entrance, waiting to see if Xylo manages to make it back alive while they finish setting their base up, and the entire time, Tearita has been sulking in the corner because she got left behind. Marlin tells Kivia that he doesn't think Tearita has much value as a weapon since she seems really attached to Xylo, but regardless of whatever he is trying to imply, Kivia informs him that she and the rest of the knights will be heading in to assist with the rescue mission as soon as they are done setting up the base here. As for Xylo and the other people, after a hard-fought battle, they successfully destroyed all the fairies that were attacking them, but their morale is at an all-time low because they don't believe they will be able to make it out of this. Xylo tries to encourage them to get back on their feet and fight, but they are all too tired and hopeless to do so. Xylo starts yelling at them to stop acting like that since they'll never survive if they give up, but he's not getting through to them, so King decides to give a speech instead. He is aware that these men have dedicated most of their lives to their jobs, and their work is what has allowed this kingdom to prosper. They have struggled through bad situation before and come out on top all the same, so there is no need to give in to fear here because they are going to survive. The men see the look of pure confidence in King's eyes, and it gives them the motivation they need to get back on their feet and try their best. They know that Xylo, King, and Tatsuya are heroes, and their whole lives, they've been told that heroes are the worst criminals around, but Xylo and the others still chose to come save them even though most others would have written them off as expendable and ditched them here, so they are truly grateful to them. Just then, the ground begins shaking as more fairies approach, and Xylo is starting to get really frustrated because these things keep on coming, and there's no way for them to know how many there are in here. The workers all get back on their feet and raise their weapons in preparation for a fight, and when the fairies actually show up, Xylo takes the initiative and attacks first. The workers are still really nervous about this whole thing, but they already decided to at least go down swinging, so one of them starts wildly swinging his shovel around until he eventually connects with the worm monster, and thanks to the enchantments King put on it, the shovel actually does some significant damage. Seeing this, the other villagers realize they might actually stand a chance after all, so they charge at the worm and start beating it to death. They were doing pretty well at first, but there's only so much that brute force with no skill can accomplish, so before long, the workers are overwhelmed. The foreman's leg has been injured, and since he can't run away, a worm is about to take him out, but at the very last second, the worm is suddenly obliterated by a flying set of swords. There's only one person who could have done this, and Xylo turns to find Tearita triumphantly standing near a passageway as she announces her arrival. Once everyone is safe, Tearita tells them that they can start praising her now, but Xylo doesn't want to. King, on the other hand, is very grateful for Tearita's intervention, because without her, several workers would have perished in that battle. Tearita tells him it was no big deal since with her and Xylo working together, victory is all but assured. Since Tearita can make an unlimited number of swords, King decides to use a few of them to build a fence for everyone to rest in. He grabs a few and gets ready to start carving the fence sacred seals into the swords. But while he's doing that, Xylo walks up to Tearita and demands to know why she is here when he told her to wait outside. She explains that she simply snuck past the knights while they weren't looking, and she asks Xylo to praise her for being so crafty, but he once again refuses. Tearita thinks Xylo must be upset because it took so long to save everyone, but she tells him that's his own fault for leaving her behind earlier. However, Xylo interrupts her and says he has no intention of using Tiarita or her power, and she is really disappointed to hear that, because being used is her whole purpose in life. She asks Xylo what he wants her to do instead, if not fighting alongside him in battle, and he tells her that she just wants her to survive, so he won't let her risk her life for useless glory. Tiarita cheers up a little after hearing him say that because she knows it means Xylo really does care about her, and that's what makes her so willing to risk her life for him. She knows seeking praise is built into her nature, but it is still part of who she is, so she wants to live a glorious and useful life, and there's nothing Xylo can do to stop her. Xylo realizes that it might be a little selfish of him to ask Tiarita to deny her desires, but before he could say anything, everyone felt another sudden tremor, and this one feels a lot worse than the others. As the monsters approach, Xylo tells Tiarita to stand back for her safety. She tells him she's not going anywhere, and if he cares about her safety so much, then all he needs to do is protect her at all costs. Xylo can't really argue with her on this, so he agrees to let Tiarita fight alongside him and picks up one of her swords to use as ammunition. He throws it at the main worm of the fairy group, slicing it in half in one go, but as he is about to throw another one, they all hear a deafening ringing sound that sends them to their knees. Tatsuya, on the other hand, seems to be completely unaffected because he's just built different. While the others are writhing in pain, he goes on the attack and starts killing as many monsters as he can. Meanwhile, Xylo has just realized that this sound must be coming from a demon lord nearby and is trying to corrupt them. Tiarita also seems to be unaffected, so she runs over to Xylo's side and begins sharing some of her energy with him to overcome the demon lord's influence. A few moments later, the demon lord in question makes an appearance and emerges from the ground as a giant living lotus tree with a human figure, and I just know someone's going to say, "Hear me out on this one." The demon lord unleashes another wave of sonic interference, and all the workers are starting to hear a voice telling them to approach it, so Xylo tries his best to stop them. He tells the foreman to get a hold of himself, but the madness is so severe that he has started trying to pull his own face off, so nothing Xylo says is going to get through to him. King is holding on to his sanity through sheer willpower and hatred toward the demon lord, but he can't do much else right now, so it's up to the others. Xylo says it would be too dangerous for them to leave the fenced area, so instead, he supports Tatsuya from back here and starts firing swords. Tiarita asks if Tatsuya is really going to be okay, but Xylo tells her there's nothing to worry about because he is incredibly skilled. However, he is still going to need backup, so Xylo asks Tiarita to make a bunch of swords for him. She's delighted that she finally gets to help Xylo fight, even if it is just a supporting role, so she creates more swords, and he starts throwing them to provide cover for Tatsuya. Tatsuya continues closing in on the demon lord while dodging its attacks until he finally slices it in half, but unfortunately, it turns out that that wasn't the demon lord's main body and Tatsuya gets grabbed. Xylo and Tiarita begin looking around, and they eventually spot the main body hanging off one of the walls nearby. Xylo prepares to finish it off with one final strike, but just as he is about to throw the sword, he realizes his body is out of luminescence, so he can't use magic anymore. Just then, the knights arrive to help, but they immediately fall victim to the demon lord's interference and fall over in agony. The demon lord then sprouts tentacles around their bodies to devour them, so Xylo is forced to run out and cut them free, but there are too many vines for him to deal with by himself. Just then, the sight of innocent people being hurt sends King into a rage, so he pulls himself free from the vines and switches his lantern to flamethrower mode to burn the demon lord to ash. Fire is really effective against plant-based monsters, but unfortunately, before he could finish the job, the demon lord grabs him by the ankle and drags him into the air. The lantern falls to the floor, and the demon lord tries to reach for it. But Tatsuya comes in clutch and drags it all the way out of the ground to buy Xylo enough time to get to the lantern. However, before he could blast that demon lord, it managed to restrict him in a cage to prevent him from aiming the flames. This would have been checkmate, but the demon lord failed to account for the fact that King is an absolute lunatic, and he will stop at nothing to punish those who hurt innocents, so he chops off his own leg just so he can fall and stab the demon lord in the eye. He ends up getting smacked into a wall, but he already did more than enough because his attack forced the demon lord to release Xylo's body, and now, nothing is stopping him from finishing off the demon lord. Kivia and the other knights are shocked by the fact that the heroes pretty much defeated the demon lord on their own, and Marlin is completely speechless. As for King, he's still alive, but he's in really bad shape, so he's going to need some repairs. A little while later, all the workers return to the surface and are reunited with their families, and the others find out that Venetim has been sitting here doing absolutely nothing the entire time. King has been sent off to the repair shop so he can get a new leg attached, and Xylo hopes he gets treated properly because if it weren't for him, a lot of lives would have been lost today. Everyone is happy to have their families reunited, and they know it's all thanks to the heroes, but they are still wary of approaching to say thanks because of the stereotype. All aside from the foreman and his family. He offers his gratitude to Xylo because it's thanks to him that he was able to see his family again, and speaking of which, he says his daughter has something she wants to give Xylo. The little girl nervously walks up to Xylo and presents him with a flower as thanks for saving her father, and Xylo is moved by the kind gesture since he rarely ever gets thanked for the work he does. Meanwhile, Marlin is over there, hating on Xylo. He tries to get Kivia to report Xylo for breaking the rules and fighting the Demon Lord without permission, but she shuts him down real quick because Xylo and his team saved lives today, and the only thing Marlin did was try to convince her to abandon those people. He deserves to enjoy at least a bit of recognition for what he has done. Now that their mission is finally over, the group heads back to base, which in this case is the Muride Fortress, but along the way, Tiarita notices that there are an awful lot of people around right now. Venedum explains that that's because there's a festival in town right now, so people from all over the region are visiting. But that aside, he asks Xylo if they can take a break because he's too exhausted to keep going. They eventually arrive at the fortress, and everyone goes their separate ways to rest. We see Venedum and Dada sitting in an alley with Dada drinking some wine he stole from a vendor a while ago, and he's enjoying every drop of it. Venedum tells him he should be a little more careful, since the people here don't joke with their money, so if he gets caught stealing, then it's game over. But Dada doesn't care, because this is one of the few times they actually get to take a break, so he wants to enjoy it. Meanwhile, down in Xylo's average New York apartment, he's enjoying his day off by reading a book, but his peace and quiet quickly comes to an end when Tiarita finds him. She has been looking all over for Xylo because she wants to go enjoy the exchange festival with him, but Xylo tells her he has no intention of going because he's bound to run into some holy knights there, and those guys are hella annoying. In that case, Tiarita asks him if he can at least play a game with her because she got his Zig chessboard from Venetum earlier today. She seems really hyped since Venetum gave her a long-winded explanation on the historical significance of the game, but Xylo tells her that if the story came from Venetum, then he likely made the whole thing up. Besides, he's busy reading his book, so he doesn't have time for board games right now. Tiarita is a little surprised since she didn't expect Xylo to be the kind of person who likes to read so much, and she's even more surprised to find out that the book he's reading is about poetry. She asks him if he can read it to her, but Xylo refuses because that would be too much work, but he will allow her to read alongside him if she wants. Just then, Kivia shows up looking for Xylo, and he assumes she must be here to tell him that his next mission has been assigned, but she tells him he's wrong. Well, his next mission has actually been decided, but that's not why she's here. She says she has something she wants to discuss with Xylo, so she asks him to follow her, but Tiarita interrupts and says she wants to come along as well. She suggests they could all go enjoy the festival together while they talk, and with Kivia there, none of the other holy knights will bother Tiarita or Xylo, so it's a win-win. Xylo and Kivia both agree to go with her, so they head out, and Tiarita is having the time of her life. There are so many things she has never seen before, so she points to a stall and asks Xylo to explain what that thing is. He tells her that that's a bowl of candy, but Tiarita has never heard of candy before because it didn't exist back in the era when she was created. There are also a bunch of other things that are new to her, like stir-fried noodles and that thing over there. Xylo already knew about the noodles, but he has never seen the other product before, so he has no idea what it is. But Kivia, on the other hand, seems to know a lot about it. She explains that it is a popular frozen treat from the first capital called ice cream, and it comes topped with honey, nuts, and caramel. Tiarita really likes the sound of that, so she asks Xylo if she can have some, and since he doesn't want to disappoint her, he agrees to buy some. He then turns to Kivia and asks if she wants one too since she seemed really enthusiastic when she was talking about the ice cream, but she says she doesn't want to waste her money on it right now. In that case, Xylo hands Tiarita a few coins and asks her to buy 2 ice creams, so she runs off to join the line. While Tiarita is in line, Xylo and Kivia stand off to the side, and while they are waiting, Kivia tells Xylo that her opinion of him has improved a lot lately. At first, she thought he was just another despicable criminal, but he saved her men on that beach, and he risked his life for the villagers that were about to be abandoned, and they are all really grateful to him. Xylo is glad to hear that his efforts are being recognized even if it's only a little, and Kivia goes on to tell him that his actions also likely saved Tiarita's life as well. Hearing this catches Xylo off guard, so he asks what she means, and Kivia explains that Tiarita was originally discovered in the northern ruins, and the 13th Order of Knights was sent to retrieve her as usual. But the military and the temple disagreed on the best way to use her. The temple wanted to form a covenant with Tiarita, and have a fight with the Holy Knights. But because Xylo had previously killed a goddess, the military came up with the idea that it might be possible to reverse engineer even more goddesses. For that reason, they demanded that Tiaretta be handed over to them for analysis, which is just a nice way of saying they were going to dissect her. But Xylo ended up forming a contract with Tiaretta instead, and the fact that he managed to defeat 2 demon lords in such a short amount of time proved that Tiaretta was more useful alive rather than as a test subject. Xylo doesn't understand how they could have ever deemed Tiaretta useless in the first place when she is a goddess with powerful abilities. But according to the message in the ruins she was found in, all Tiaretta can really do is summon swords. It is said that the goddesses descended onto the world in an age known as the Great Civilized Era, and their natures vary wildly from one to the next. Some can produce potent poison, some can summon lightning strikes or violent storms, and some can even see visions of the future. They awaken whenever the demon blight emerges, and after fulfilling their purpose, they usually go back to sleep in their coffins. Xylo already knows about the different abilities a goddess can possess, and apparently, Tatsuya was summoned from another world by a goddess at one point. But that aside, compared to the abilities of the 12 goddesses that have been discovered so far, the military thinks of Tiaretta's sword summoning power as inferior, so they were willing to sacrifice her. And the knights had no choice but to go along with the order, which is why they wanted to sacrifice themselves to atone for their sin. Xylo asked her to give him the details of the next assignment as soon as possible, because as long as he does a good job on it, he will be proving Tiaretta's usefulness, so she won't be dissected. Kivia appreciates Xylo's conviction, so she tells him that the next mission will require him and the others to defend this fortress. A little while later, Xylo and Venetim meet with the commander of the mission, and it's pretty much the same as what Kivia said, but there's one problem. The commander is telling them to defend the fortress with their lives. The goal of the mission is to defend the fortress while luring the demon lord, Iblis, into the area, after which a large-scale poison attack will be unleashed by the 9th goddess to defeat it. Xylo scoffs at the idea since it has already been established that poison alone isn't enough to defeat a demon lord. All it does is put it in a state of suspended animation for a while, and the commander admits that Xylo is right, but he says revisions have been made to the strategy to ensure that it works this time. They plan to turn the fortress into a continuous kill chamber for the demon lord, so the heroes have to act as its defense until they die in the process. Venetim speaks up and asks why they can't simply escape after successfully luring the demon lord into the trap instead of dying, but the commander just says that's just the way it has to be. And if any of them attempt to leave the fortress, then the entire squad will be executed using the sacred seals on their necks. Xylo doesn't understand why they would be going so far to make sure all the heroes die, but then he remembers that priest from before, and he must have pulled some strings to make this happen because of his grudge. All of a sudden, Venetim cheerfully announces that he and his team will gladly accept the mission and defend the fortress with their lives. But he does have a few suggestions to improve the plan a little. First off, he thinks it's a little counterproductive to take out the entire team if even one person tries to leave, since there's bound to be someone who just wants to get the dying part over with as soon as possible, and they would ruin the entire plan. This is why he suggests that the rule be that they'll only be executed if everyone tries to leave instead of just one person. He also mentions that since Tiaretta is extremely devoted to Xylo, she's bound to want to stay by his side, so he asks the commander if he's okay with that. The commander says he doesn't have the authority to give orders to a goddess, but Kivia does have that authority. So Venetim asks Xylo to go talk to her to make it official, but before Xylo leaves, he asks Venetim if there's anything else he wants because he's going to try and negotiate with the commander. Xylo says he's going to need more troops and provisions if possible, and Venetim promises to do his best. After all, he's a master at convincing people. Before Venetim was sentenced to be a hero, he was a con artist of the highest magnitude, and he had just been captured. He had committed several different types of fraud, including attempting to sell the royal castle to a circus, and he got pretty close to getting away with it too. But that's not the reason he's on trial here today. The reason is this: a third-rate newspaper that he wrote because his boss wanted him to do a little fear-mongering among the masses. It talked about how some higher-ups in the temple and even some royals were spies influenced by the demon Blight hiding in human form, and Venetim admits he wrote that. But he made the whole thing up, and he didn't really expect anyone to take it seriously. But as it turns out, everything he wrote was actually true. And it was also convincing enough to make people believe it's true, so to make sure Venetim can't share any more truths, he was sentenced to be a hero. Back to the present, Venetim managed to convince the commander to give in to all of his demands, but Venetim did get stuck with the task of getting Tiaretta to safety if she is ever in danger, and considering how weak his body is, that's definitely not going to go well. On another note, the reinforcements Xylo requested were approved, and Sav has returned to the unit, but he's a bit of a loose cannon, so Dada isn't too thrilled about having to work with him again. Meanwhile, we see Sav outside betting on a game, and the guy he's up against seems to have won, but Sav calls him out for cheating. Sav apparently has really good eyesight and senses, so he knows he's right about the guy cheating, but the guy refuses to accept that he has been caught and tries to threaten Sav into leaving his money. However, Sav doesn't take being threatened well and chops the guy's hand off as punishment for cheating, after which he casually gets up and leaves because he's feeling hungry. Before Sav became a hero, he was an assassin raised by the Order, and the Order normally uses all sorts of manipulation tactics and torture to turn their members into mindless killing machines. But Sav was pretty much mindless to begin with, so their methods didn't really do much to him. He doesn't really have a concept of morality outside himself and the people he cares about, so he just went around killing whoever at will whenever the Order told him to. The one in charge of Sav's sentencing feels a little bad for him since most of his kills were done under the command of the Order, and the kingdom is well aware of how brutal they can be, but even so, Sav still committed the crimes, so he must be punished. The sentencer asks him if he's scared of what might happen because next case here, he might get life in prison, while worst case, he'll be sentenced to death. And Sav admits that he's absolutely terrified, but he knows being scared won't help him in this situation, so he's just trying to enjoy the moment. Just then, another sentencer walks in and asks Sav how he chooses his victims when it's time for him to kill. And Sav admits that he usually gets ordered to kill someone, but most of the time, after watching his target for a while, he starts to get attached. At that point, he would feel bad if he were to kill the person, so instead he'd just kill a completely unrelated person instead and call it a day. The judge listens intently, and with a smile on his face, he tells Sav that a fate like death is much too lenient for someone like him. Hearing this makes Sav panic a little because he really doesn't want to find out what a fate worse than death feels like. So he starts asking if he can just accept a death penalty and call it a day, but it's already too late because the second judge tells him he is going to be sentenced to be a hero. Back to the present, the group is walking to the site of their last stand, but while the others would much prefer to walk in silence, Sav is over here telling them his life story for the 7th time in a row now. It's a miracle he hasn't lost his mind already given the number of times he has died, but then again, it's not like he had much of a mind to begin with. Xylo turns to Sav and tells him to shut up before he sticks a muzzle on him. One of Sav's many flaws, aside from his stupidity, is the fact that he literally doesn't know when to stop talking, which is why Dada and the others hate having to work with him. That said, Sav does seem to have a lot of respect for Xylo, so he does his best to listen to Xylo's orders and not make him mad. As they progress, the group soon catches sight of the demon lord they will be facing, and it's a lot closer than they anticipated. At this rate, that thing will reach the fort before nightfall, so they need to get ready for a fight. Xylo asks Kivia how many soldiers they have on their side, and she tells him there are around 50 trustworthy soldiers at their disposal, but Xylo doesn't think that's going to be enough. Thankfully, Venetim was able to recruit a bunch of prisoners to help with the mission, but this has Kivia a little concerned because she doesn't recall hearing about prisoners being part of the mission. Xylo explains that Venetim pretty much bribed a few hands to gain control over a bunch of death row inmates, and since they are going to be executed anyway, Venetim is free to do whatever he wants with them. Just then, Dada notices a few of the demons running ahead of the rest of the pack, and Sav assumes those must be the demon scouts, so he takes a look and identifies a few dog demons in the forest. Kivia is surprised that Sav could spot the demons that far away without using a telescope, but Xylo tells her that this much is normal for Sav since his eyesight is far beyond what's humanly possible. Xylo asks Sav if he can take them down from here, and Sav agrees to try, but he says he can't guarantee that he will hit his mark. Sav then pulls out a special magic spear and takes aim at the dog before firing a shot and blowing its head off. Sav is really proud of himself for getting a direct hit, but Dada reminds him that there are still a lot more dogs to deal with, so he needs to stay focused. Kivia asks Xylo if it's really alright to leave this to those two, and Xylo says there shouldn't be any problem since Sav's sniping skills are so good that he has literally never seen the guy miss a shot. He is fairly confident that Sav will be able to take out most of the scouts, so now, all that's left is to set up the traps. Kivia is surprised that Xylo is so level-headed even though this is a losing battle, but he says he just doesn't want to give the higher-ups looking down on him the satisfaction of seeing him die. And besides, he needs to succeed here to prove Tiurita's usefulness. Otherwise, she's going to be dissected sooner or later. Kivia has heard a lot of rumors about Xylo, mostly about him being so eager for glory that he put his comrades in danger, but it looks like the rumors were wrong. Xylo laughs and asks if Kivia is a noble because they are the only ones who spread those kinds of rumors about him, but Kivia says she's not a noble. Xylo straight up doesn't believe her, because there's no way the higher-ups would let a commoner become a knight commander, but Kivia never said she was a commoner either. She explains that her father is the high priest of the church, and Xylo is shocked to hear this because the high priest is pretty much the highest-ranking official within the church. So he's a really big deal. Just then, Sav tells Xylo that he's done dealing with the dogs, so Xylo tells him and Dada to wait on standby here while he goes to take care of some other business. Xylo and Kivia later head back to the fort, and as they approach the gate, they end up running into the commander of the 9th Knight's Order and his goddess, Pelmary. Horde is surprised that Kivia intends to stay behind in the fortress instead of just leaving the condemned heroes to die. He doesn't understand why she puts so much faith in them, and he thinks it's a dumb decision, but he still prays for her safety nonetheless. However, he has nothing but disdain towards Xylo and tells Pelmary to keep her distance from him because you never know when he might decide to kill another goddess. This pisses Xylo off, but he knows arguing won't get him anywhere, so he decides to let it go. Before anything more could be said, Pelmary speaks up and asks Horde if he thinks she was useful during the previous mission. Horde tells her she was absolutely perfect and pats her head as a reward. But now that there's nothing left for him to do here, he tells the members of his team to get ready to leave, and they all walk past Xylo and Kivia. Xylo and Kivia then walk into the fortress, where countless barrels of wine have been prepared. Sav asks what all the wine is for, so Xylo explains that they are going to detonate it all when the demons get here, and after that, Pelmary will poison the demon lord repeatedly until it dies. Sav realizes this pretty much means they are going to be forced to die, and the fact that he is being used as a pawn is pissing him off. So he decides to blow off some steam with some perfectly legal self-defense. He provokes one of the nearby knights into picking a fight with him, and as soon as the knight puts his hands on Sav, he takes out his knife and is about to slit the dude's throat. But fortunately, Xylo managed to stop Sav in time, and one of the dude's friends comes over to pull him away, so nothing bad ends up happening, but it could have gotten pretty messy. Xylo asked Sav what he was thinking, and Sav explains that he just wanted to vent his frustration a little. Kind of like kicking a rock when you're frustrated, but Xylo reminds him that humans and rocks are not the same. Just then, Tyrita shows up, and she's really pissed that Xylo went out to do recon without bringing her along. She's also upset because she ran into the goddess of the 9th unit today, and she found out that Pelmary gets 7 head pats a day. Meanwhile, Xylo hasn't given her even a single head pat since the day she was awakened. She starts trying to bargain for at least 3 pats a day from Xylo, but he remains completely uninterested and brushes her off, which makes Tyrita throw a hissy fit. Just then, a guard shows up to inform Kivia that a group of men has just arrived at the back gate, and they all seem to be looking for Xylo. Xylo doesn't understand what's going on since he can't imagine anyone that would come looking for him here, but when he goes to meet the men, he realizes that they are the miners he saved from the caves. They tell him they all want to assist in any way they can, but Xylo is unwilling to accept their help because he doesn't want to put them in danger. He tells them to just go back to their families before it's too late, but the men explain that they aren't here solely out of gratitude. After the mine was infected, their village suffered a huge loss, and if this mission fails, then the same thing will happen again, so they want to do everything they can to help. Xylo is about to turn them down again, but King suddenly shows up and heartily welcomes the aid of the miners. Xylo tries to talk him out of making such a hasty decision because these people aren't fit for combat, but King had no intention of sacrificing them on the battlefield. Instead, he has a much more effective way for them to help. He explains that while sacred seals are complex, as long as he makes a blueprint for them to follow, the miners should be able to carve as many seals as necessary to boost the fortress's defenses. King has the men extremely motivated, so Xylo decides to just let them do as they please for now. A few hours later, all preparations for the battle have been completed, so everyone gathers to review the details of the plan one last time. Tatsuya is in charge of sealing off the underground passages, and Sav will be tasked with guarding the back entrance of the fort with the prison recruits, while King is in charge of supporting the snipers with the miners. As for what Xylo will be doing, the original official plan of blowing this place up and poisoning the Demon Lord is a death sentence for all of them. So Xylo plans to take the initiative and use the traps he laid out earlier to kill the Demon Lord before it reaches the fort. A little while later, Xylo meets with the recruited death row inmates and tries to explain the plan to them, but they get offended by the thought of having to take orders from a hero, so one of them grabs Xylo by the shirt. Unfortunately, that was a poor decision, because the second the guy touches Xylo, Sav shoots a completely different guy in the back who was just minding his own business. All the prisoners are stunned and ask why Sav didn't just shoot the guy that was causing the trouble. So he explains that the big guy looks like he's strong enough to do a lot of work, so it would have been a waste to kill him. Xylo walks over to Sav and slams him against the wall, because while he won't deny that this is an effective way to get them to listen, he warns Sav not to do that again and walks off. And that's when the prisoners realize that listening to Xylo might be their best chance of survival here. Xylo then gets called into a meeting with Venetim because Venetim just received a letter addressed to him. However, Xylo immediately tells Venetim to burn the letter as soon as he recognizes the seal on it, but Venetim tells him to please hear him out. The letter is from the Frenzy Mastabold, of the Mastabold family, and for some reason, they are offering to lend an army to help defend the fort. Venetim would like to accept the offer since it would significantly boost the odds of their victory, but Xylo wants nothing to do with Frenzy, so he refuses. There's nothing Venetim can do to convince Xylo, so he decides to change topics and asks Xylo if he believes in conspiracy theories. Xylo asks if he's talking about that strange news article he published a few years ago about there being demon worshippers among the higher-ups, because it obviously sounds fake. And Venetim can see why he wouldn't believe it, but he asks what Xylo would do if it turned out to be true that there were demon worshippers working behind the scenes to make sure humanity loses the war. After all, it would explain all the illogical and dumb decisions that the higher-ups have been making recently, and now that Xylo really thinks about it, it does seem really suspicious. As night falls, the demon army approaches the castle, so they ready their defenses and King and the miners begin taking shots at the demon cavalry. After the initial wave has been taken care of, they activate the walls enchanted with sacred seals to keep the rest at bay, and once the coast is clear, Kivia's unit advances to face the demons head-on. Everything was going just as planned at first, but then Xylo spots something he never expected to see out here. There's a group of humans riding on the demon horses, and they proceed to fire flaming arrows into the fortress. Considering the fact that the fortress is loaded with flammable wine, everyone starts scrambling to put out the fires, and that panic allows a few of the demon horses to break through the front gate. And at this rate, it's only a matter of time before they are all wiped out. Tiarita asks whether those people have been infected by the blight, but from what Xylo can see, it doesn't look like that's the case. These people are still perfectly normal, but they have chosen to side with the demons instead of humanity. However, for that to be possible, that must mean there are demons out there that's capable of communicating with humans and convincing them to switch sides, which is a terrifying thought. Tiarita is a bit shaken by this revelation because according to her nature as a goddess, she can't harm ordinary humans in battle, even if they are working with demons. But Xylo was already aware of that limitation, and he knows exactly how to handle it. Before he makes his move, he contacts Kivia over the radio and asks her if she has any idea who those humans are, but she's just as clueless as everyone else here is. The only thing she knows is that those men must be from a noble's private army, because they seem to be extremely skilled with horseback archery. But other than that, nada. The humans soon begin pulling back, and Kivia's unit still has their hands full, so they can't pursue them. So Xylo uses his telescope to keep track of where they are going, and realizes that they are heading straight towards the underground passage. Fortunately, Xylo had sent Tatsuya down there with a few knights to guard the entry point, and Venetim's here as well, but honestly he's not going to be of much help. Back on the surface, Tov tells King that he should probably retreat soon since the front gate won't last much longer, but he refuses because if he were to retreat there would be no one to motivate his men. He orders everyone to prepare the magic cannons for an attack, so they all frantically begin loading the artillery, and as King gives the order to fire, the demons are bombarded. The cannons do quite a bit of damage, but the accuracy of King's men leaves something to be desired, so he tells them to reload and prepare to fire again. But unfortunately, the demon army is progressing faster than they thought it would, and if nothing is done, they will be overrun before they get a chance to reload. King can't let that happen, so he calls for Xylo to join the fight and hold the demons back. Xylo understands the situation and tells Tiarita it's their turn to fight now, but before they do that, she has something she wants to say to him. Ever since they met, Xylo has been telling her not to risk her life for the sake of others, yet he has no problem doing so himself. Xylo tries to argue that it's not a problem if he dies, since the church can just bring him back to life, but Tiarita is convinced that even if he couldn't be resurrected, he would still risk his life all the same, because just like her, he finds purpose in living for the sake of others. And when he says he hates the people-pleasing nature of goddesses, that's because deep down it reminds him of himself. Xylo wants to retort, but he can't think of anything to say because he knows Tiarita is right. But just then he spots the demon lord on the horizon, so he cuts the conversation short and tells Tiarita it's time for them to get to work. Meanwhile, down in the passageway, the demon-aligned humans are closing in on the defense team, and the soldiers are starting to panic because there are too many of them to defeat with so few numbers. However, Tatsuya casually walks up to the front and lets out an ear-piercing battle cry before beheading one of the humans, so fast that the others couldn't even see what happened. He then proceeds to lay waste to the humans, and when the knights, who before now were terrified, realize that Tatsuya is carrying them, they all find the courage to fire at the remaining attackers until the passage is fully cleared. And while they are all glad to be alive, they are also terrified by what Tatsuya is capable of. Back on Xylo and Teorita's end, they have finally spotted the Demon Lord, so it is time for them to go on the offensive. Xylo wants to conserve Teorita's energy, so he chooses to go around instead of having a head-on battle with it. Teorita understands the plan and creates a sword for Xylo, which he promptly throws at the nearest monster, causing a massive explosion. Teorita has gotten really good at predicting what Xylo is going to need, so when 3 frog monsters try to sneak up on them, she immediately spawns in enough swords for Xylo to take them out without him needing to say a single word. However, there are too many monsters in this area, and Xylo doesn't want to continue wasting energy on blowing them up, so he grabs Teorita and prepares to jump away. However, just before he could leave the ground, his foot was suddenly grabbed by a demonized worm, keeping him trapped in this spot. Teorita offers to use her power to free him at once, but Xylo tells her to stop because she needs to save her energy to defeat Iblis. Though the situation isn't looking good since the demons are all closing in on Xylo's location, and he doesn't know what to do. Just when things were looking hopeless, the demons all hear the sounds of a small army approaching on horseback, and that distracts them long enough for Xylo to free himself from the worms group and jump away with Teorita on his shoulders. As they fly towards Iblis, Teorita asks Xylo if he knows who that army belongs to and why they are here. But while Xylo knows exactly who those people are, he is anything but happy to see them. As soon as he lands, he calls Venetim to demand an explanation, because he explicitly told him not to accept aid from those people. Venetim knows Xylo is mad right now, but they desperately needed the reinforcements, and honestly, Xylo is partly to blame here since he's the one who chose to trust a conman to follow instructions. There's nothing Xylo can do about it now, so he just focuses on treating his wounds so he can get back into the fight as soon as possible. But halfway through, he gets a call from Dada, and he sounds absolutely terrified. Xylo looks over and sees Dada being chased down by a group of mercenaries, and he doesn't understand how this could have happened since he asked Dada to go hire the mercenaries. Dada reminds Xylo that his instructions were to steal some money, and then use that money to hire some mercenaries to defend the fortress, but he thought it would be more efficient to just steal the money from the mercenaries themselves. However, the mercenaries really didn't seem to like that. Xylo is pissed that Dada messed up so badly, but if nothing else, having so many people on the battlefield confuses the Demon Lord enough to create an opening for Xylo and Teorita, so he plans to take full advantage of it. While the Demon Lord is still distracted, Xylo jumps right on top of it, and once he and Teorita are in position, Teorita uses her power to summon a giant sword to pierce the Demon Lord's body. The sword won't be enough to kill the Demon Lord, but that's fine, since the goal here was just to get its attention. A few moments later, Xylo heads and Teorita head into the forest where several magic devices have been prepared and buried in advance. Xylo activates them all just before the Demon Lord arrives, and as it lunges at him, it lands face first in the trap. A sinkhole appears beneath the Demon Lord as a result, and with the ground sinking, it is unable to climb out of the hole. So while it is stuck in place, Teorita proceeds to summon several giant swords on top of it. As Teorita's swords pierce the Demon Lord's body, it attempts to stop them by corrupting the blades, but she pushes back and forces the swords in, dealing a great deal of damage to the Demon Lord. By the end of her attack, the Demon Lord lays motionless at the bottom of the pit, and Teorita is clearly exhausted, so Xylo tells her to rest here for a minute while he goes to call the Poison Goddess to finish the Demon Lord off. He's honestly pretty annoyed by the fact that the higher-ups intended to sacrifice them alongside the fortress, even though it was this easy to defeat the Demon Lord. Sure, it's still alive, but with wounds this severe, there's no way this thing can budge a muscle. Xylo's assessment of the situation was correct, yet he had failed to consider the fact that the Demon Lord is capable of splitting itself from its main body. So as a new eye opens, it fires dozens of spikes into the air. Xylo warns Teorita to run for cover immediately, but she isn't able to react in time, so he is forced to run over to protect her, and ends up taking a spike to the back as a result. Meanwhile, the Demon Lord is preparing to attack once more. The situation here is bad, but it's even worse back at the fortress, because it is almost completely engulfed in flames and overrun with monsters. King orders everyone to retreat with immediate effect because he doesn't want any more casualties. But evacuating isn't really an option right now, since the only escape route is currently being swarmed by demons. Back to Xylo and Teorita. Teorita rushes over to Xylo to check if he's alright, but he just tells her to get out of here while she still can. She may want to continue fighting, but he can tell that she is at her limit, and if she uses any more of her power, there might be serious after effects. He admits that she was right earlier when she said he finds purpose in being useful to others. He wants to win battles, he wants people to think he is cool, He wants to be able to aura farm, and while he knows his desires are both selfish and foolish, he still chooses to follow them, but he doesn't want to drag her down with him. Tiarita stands beside Xylo and tells him that regardless of how he feels, she is going to fight by his side no matter what, because after all, she is his mighty goddess. She tells him that if he really wants her to survive, then all he needs to do is make sure they win. And Xylo looks like he's fine with that, so he tells her to be prepared to win this fight no matter what. As the Demon Lord breaks into a smaller flying form, Tiarita takes off her cape and tells Xylo she is going to make him a special sword. Xylo asks if the sword will be strong enough to defeat a nearly immortal monster. So she explains that she's about to summon a holy sword, and there is almost nothing it can destroy, but she won't be able to make it last long, so he had better not miss his shot. The Demon Lord tries to use its tentacles to stop Xylo, and it succeeds in stabbing him through the chest. But thanks to some cover fire from Dada and Solve, Xylo is able to grab hold of the holy sword, and as the Demon Lord charges at him, he lets it bite his arm as bait before stabbing it right in the eye with the holy sword. He recalls that Tiarita told him there's nothing this sword can't destroy, and as he twists the blade inside the Demon Lord, it is instantly disintegrated, almost like it never existed to begin with. The holy sword soon crumbles to dust, and Tiarita's exhaustion catches up to her, causing her to fall over, and Xylo manages to catch her, but he isn't doing so well either, so he soon faints as well. The next time Xylo opens his eyes, he finds himself in an infirmary with a member of the church sitting by his bedside. He has no idea who this guy is. The man says he went to great lengths to patch Xylo up enough so he doesn't need to go to the repair shop. Xylo tells the guy to leave because he doesn't trust people from the church, and he agrees. But before he goes, he informs Xylo that his efforts aren't going unnoticed. Many civilians and even some high-ranking officials have started seeing him in a positive light recently, and Xylo is glad to be recognized, but Xylo doesn't want to receive praise from the church, so he tells the man once again to leave. But the man says there's one more thing he wants to say before he leaves. He warns Xylo that he should be careful not to disobey too many orders from now on, because there are a few high-ranking nobles who are upset by how successful Xylo has been with taking down demon lords. They are part of a faction called the Demon Blight Coexisters, and the name is pretty self-explanatory. So he leaves Xylo to decide what he's going to do with that information. Once the man leaves, Tiarita walks into the room to check on Xylo, and for a moment, Xylo has flashbacks to how Sinerva used to act the same way. Tiarita notices the look of absolute shock on his face, and she becomes worried that Xylo might have forgotten her because of his injuries, but he pats her head and says he could never forget her. A short while later, Kivia walks into the room and tells Xylo that she has some news for him, but Xylo asks her to come back later because he's not in the mood to discuss troublesome matters right now. Unfortunately, Kivia tells him that he's going to have to listen because this is important, and it's about what's next for him now that he has defeated another demon lord. There have been a lot of dispute over what should happen to Tiarita between the military and the church, but after the recent victory, the military has been forced to acknowledge Tiarita's usefulness. And as such, it has been decided that both Tiarita and Xylo will be temporarily assigned to the 13th Order of Knights that Kivia is in charge of. Xylo doesn't like the sound of that since he hasn't gotten to take a break in a long time, but Kivia explains that all he will need to do is stay in this city for a while and make sure Tiarita is protected. The way she said that makes Xylo concerned that someone is coming after Tiarita, and Kivia confirms this, explaining that there are a few heretics amongst the members who still refuse to acknowledge Tiarita as a new goddess, so there's a chance that they might commission assassins to come after Tiarita. Overall, this just means that as long as Xylo can ensure Tiarita's safety, he gets to take a much-needed vacation. And Tiarita is excited for it because this means she finally gets to spend some quality time with him. A few hours later, Xylo is reading one of his books, and Tiarita has fallen asleep beside him. But just then, a guy named Jace walks in looking for him. Jace is one of the other heroes, and he heard that Xylo defeated 3 demon lords, which is impressive, but he says he's not going to count the first 2 since he had a lot of help from Dada and King. As for Jace, he has personally defeated 2 demon lords since they last met, so he triumphantly announces that he's ahead on their wager 2-1. Xylo asks if Jace is sure he really defeated 2 demon lords on his own, because he recalls that Rhino was stationed with him, but Jace says Rhino was of no help. In fact, he ended up disobeying too many orders and got sent to the punishment room. He then starts bragging to Xylo about how much better he is, but Tiarita gets offended and tells Jace that he isn't allowed to disrespect Xylo like that. But then Jace starts disrespecting Tiarita instead, and she's about to blow a head gasket, but Xylo tells her there's no point in arguing with someone like Jace. Jace then demands that Xylo pay up for losing the bet, and Xylo just wants to get rid of him, so he hands Jace the money and tells him to leave. Once Jace is gone, Tiarita asks what that dude's problem is, So Xylo explains that Jace is their team's dragoon, and he was busted for growing and selling illegal substances for dragons at one point. Though, his main crime was a charge of mutiny when he attempted to set all of the kingdom's dragons free despite the order not to do so. Normally, he would have been stopped within a day, but Jace is from a powerful noble family, and dragons seem to love him for some reason, so he caused quite a bit of damage before he was caught. A few moments later, Venetim nervously peeks his head through the door to check on Xylo, and the second Xylo sees him, he gets out of bed and throws him against a wall. He's pissed because Venetim went ahead and accepted help from the Mastibold Brigade even though he explicitly told him not to. But Venetim defends himself by pointing out that things would have ended up a lot worse if the Mastibold Brigade hadn't shown up as reinforcements. Xylo can't deny that, but he's still pissed regardless, because he knows Venetim must be hiding something from him. Venetim denies it at first, but after being threatened, he reveals that Frenchie did ask to have a meeting with Xylo, and Xylo is not happy to hear that. Teorita has no idea what's going on, so she asks Xylo who Frenchie is, and he reveals that she is his former fiancée. A few minutes later, Xylo agrees to meet with Frenchie, and she immediately says she's disappointed because Xylo has gotten worse since the last time she saw him. She compares him to a caterpillar, and most would get offended by this, but Xylo knows Frenchie isn't trying to be mean. She just says stuff like that from time to time. He tells her she needs to work on her comparison, and Frenchie apologizes because she had no idea what she said was insulting. She just wanted to encourage Xylo to behave in a manner that befits a future member of the Mastibold family. She then asks if the girl beside him is the goddess that everyone has been talking about, and as soon as Teorita gets a chance to speak, she asks Frenchie to state the nature of her relationship with Xylo. Xylo says he already mentioned that Frenchie is his former fiancée, but Frenchie interrupts him and makes it clear that she still has every intention of marrying him, so there's nothing formal about their engagement. Xylo reminds Frenchie that he's a hero now, and legally speaking, heroes aren't even considered human, so there's no way she would be allowed to marry him. Teorita gets a little jealous at the thought that Frenchie might steal Xylo away from her, but while she's trying to lay claim to him, Frenchie doesn't really take her seriously. In fact, she likens the situation to the time her father's pet became obsessed with Xylo, yet absolutely hated her. Teorita is offended by the fact that Frenchie just compared her to a pet, but Frenchie ignores her and tells Xylo that he doesn't have to worry about his hero status because she is currently working on getting him pardoned. Xylo is shocked to hear that because he didn't even think it was possible to get a pardon, but Frenchie moves on and mentions that she plans to stay in this city for some time, and she doesn't intend to leave until she has tracked down the demon Blight. Xylo and Teorita go silent after hearing that and ask Frenchie what she means, so she explains that about a month ago, she and the Night Chiefs embarked on a mission to track down a demon lord, but a few days ago, their entire force vanished somewhere near this town. The demon lord responsible was Number 59, Spriggan, and Frenchie suspects that the demon might be disguising itself as a human. Teorita had no idea that demons were even capable of masquerading as humans, and that's expected since it's a rare and annoying ability among demons. It means it's going to be several times harder to track this demon down, especially since it has most likely already made its way into the city, so Frenchie warns Xylo to keep his guard up. That was pretty much all she had to say, so she gets up to leave, but before she does, she asks who the person spying on them from behind that wall is. It turns out that Kivia has been spying on them this entire time, and she tries to make up an excuse, saying she's required to keep an eye on Xylo, but Frenchie knows she's lying. Though he doesn't want to make a big deal out of it, so she just lets it go. Later that day, Xylo, Teorita, and Kivia all head outside, and Teorita says she wants to go do some sightseeing because Dada mentioned that this city has a lot of free food available. But Xylo tells her the food isn't free, Dada was just stealing. Besides, they don't have time for sightseeing since they are here to lure out the temple heretics who are after Teorita, but on the topic of protecting Teorita, Xylo tells her that she is not allowed to tell anybody about the holy sword she made, because if the temple found out that she has that kind of power, their lives would become a whole lot more difficult. In the meantime, Xylo and Kivia are going to accompany Teorita at all times to make sure she's safe, but Xylo wants to bring one more person along to make sure all their bases are covered. Venetim is pretty much useless as a guard, so he's a no-go. Dada would end up stealing a whole bunch of stuff if he were let loose in town. And as for Bryce, he's too busy taking care of his dragons, so the only option remaining is Sav. Though, Xylo really doesn't like the fact that Sav won't just shut up. Sav has been talking non-stop about how messed up the Wenmosa organization was. They called themselves a religious order, but they were pure evil. They did human sacrifices, offered kids to gods, and then drank the blood of those kids. But it's not like that would ever happen in real life, right? Anyway, since they are here anyway, Tiarita asks Xylo to come pick out a souvenir to commemorate their first real outing together, and Xylo agrees. While Tiarita is busy looking at the items available, Xylo asks Sav if he has any idea what an assassin might attempt in order to get to Tiarita in a place like this. Sav explains that it's possible they might try to blend into the crowd and slit Tiarita's throat while passing by, so that's something they need to watch out for. Just then, Tiarita yells that she wants Xylo to pay more attention to her. And Xylo doesn't want to make her upset, so he goes back to shopping with her, until he eventually comes across a weapons stall. At first, he thinks it's a bad idea to get a knife for Tiarita since it's dangerous, but she tells him that if he just teaches her how to use it properly, then she should be fine. Tiarita makes a good point, so Xylo agrees to buy the knife for her, but as he is sheathing it, he notices the reflection of two sinister-looking dudes behind him. And a moment later, one of them attempts to stab Tiarita in the back, but Kivia was already prepared for that and sliced his hand off in an instant, and while she was doing that, Sav casually slit the throat of the other guy, but there are more on their way, so Kivia tells Xylo to take Tiarita and run while they handle the rest. Xylo and Tiarita quickly make their way through the alley, and a few moments later, Kivia and Sav catch up to them, but they can tell that something is wrong. Kivia stationed tons of knights in this area to provide reinforcements in the event of an attack on Tiarita, but there are none in the area right now, and Kivia is worried that something might have happened to them. Sav assures her that her knights are probably fine, because the people who just attacked weren't religious order assassins. He can tell because they had no real training, but if that's the case, then it means they must have been related to the demon disguised as a human in the city and the people supporting it, since that's the only group that would stand to benefit from Tiarita's death. As they come to this realization, they are suddenly attacked by another assassin, but this one is considerably more skilled than the others, because when Sav tries to attack them, he gets his arm completely shredded. Sav warns Xylo to be careful because this one has some filthy trick up her sleeve, and Xylo has a good idea of what's going on. So he tells Tiarita to stay back while he and Kivia handle this. He throws two blades at the assassin, but as one explodes, the assassin rushes forward and tries to stab Xylo with its metal arm. Xylo ducks underneath, and Kivia tries to take advantage of the opportunity to strike, but Xylo pulls her back because he thinks it's too risky, and it's a good thing he did, because a second later, the assassin nearly obliterates Kivia with tons of metal tendrils. The assassin is apparently able to freely manipulate the metal in her arms, and that makes her a troublesome foe to face, but Xylo and Kivia aren't willing to back down here. However, just then, a group of soldiers shows up, and a man named Bujim tells Shishibao that she needs to withdraw because her chances of beating a hero who's pacted with a goddess are very slim. Shishibao gets mad at Bujim because he basically just docks her in front of enemies by using her full name, and he apologizes, but he simply wasn't aware that that was against the rules in this line of work. One of the men tries to tell Bujim that they should get going before the Holy Knights arrive, but Bujim doesn't take kindly to being interrupted, so he knocks the guy's jaw clean off. Shishibao reminds Bujim that they are meant to be avoiding unnecessary casualties, but Bujim defends himself by pointing out that the guy isn't actually dead, so he's not a casualty yet. Anyway, it's time for Bujim to get to work, so he jumps into the air and aims for Xylo. Xylo tries to take him out with a dagger, but Bujim dodges midair with ease, and then, using something that looks like demonic energy, he extends his arm and strikes at Xylo with it. Xylo manages to duck underneath and counter with a dagger throw, but Bujim was quick enough to counter the counter with a piece of the floor. Once things settle down, Bujim asks if Xylo is the infamous hero who has slain many demon lords. Xylo doesn't answer and instead asks if Bujim was part of a circus or something, because no normal human should be able to move as smoothly as he does, but Bujim denies it, saying he has never been in a circus before. He then asks Xylo if he was in a circus, and Xylo admits that he spent 3 years in one with his specialty being knife throwing, to which Bujim compliments Xylo's skills because he has never seen anyone as good at it as he is. Shishibao cuts Bujim off and tells him he's not supposed to have casual conversations with the enemy, to which Bujim apologizes because he's still getting the hang of all this. Tiarita carefully approaches Xylo and asks him if he wants her to rain down swords on this guy, but Xylo doesn't think that's a good idea since he knows how much goddesses hate harming humans. Tiarita admits that it's true she hates the idea of harming a person, but for some reason, she feels no guilt when she thinks about sliming Bujim out. Just then, there's a strong gust of wind, and Xylo knows exactly what that means, so he tells everyone to run for cover, and a moment later, scorching dragon flame fills the alley. It looks like Jace finally decided to come help, but while they thought the dragon fire would be enough to take out Bujim, along with all the other demon worshippers, to their surprise, from beyond the flame, Bujim is still standing. He says this has been a very educational endeavor, but that dragon flame did an awful lot of damage to his body, so he is forced to retreat so he can regenerate properly. And seeing all this happen pretty much confirms that Bujim is actually Demon Lord Spriggan. After everything was over, Kivia called a meeting with all her lieutenants to discuss the situation. Thanks to the efforts of Xylo and Jace, they managed to thwart the attack of the assassins, but the entire night network that Kivia had set up in advance was somehow decimated, and the execution was way too precise, so she believes the assassins had inside information. All the lieutenants are concerned because if there really is a mole, then that puts them in a tough spot. One of them suggests that they should limit information regarding the protection of Tirida to only people they trust, but Xylo cuts him off and says that's a stupid idea because, as things are now, they can't trust anyone. For all they know, the mole might be one of them in this room right now, so if they really want to find out who it is, he suggests they should call in the 12th Order of the Holy Knights to investigate. The other knight objects to the idea, because while the 12th Order does specialize in investigation, they don't show themselves in public, so calling them for a task like this would put them in a difficult position. However, Xylo says they have no choice, because until they find the mole, their entire operation is doomed to fail. Xylo and the lieutenants seem to be at odds, so Kivia intervenes and asks the advisor she brought in, Priest Marlen, to give his opinion on the situation. Marlen just got here from the capital, but he understands the gist of the situation, and as it stands, there's no way to know if anyone here is trustworthy, and that includes himself. That said, he's not sure the 12th Order will be able to work on a case like this, so they need to figure out as much as they can on their own. He asks Kivia if she managed to get any useful information out of the prisoners she captured, but unfortunately, the ones she caught alive all turned out to be adventurers who had no info to divulge. It would have been different if she had managed to capture one of the assassins alive, but she didn't, and Kivia blames herself for that mistake. Marlen tells her she shouldn't take this too personally because it isn't her fault, and Kivia promises to take that into consideration. Marlen wishes she would be a little less formal with him since he's her uncle, but just then, Xylo interrupts him because he has something to say. Kivia tries to warn him to be quiet, but Xylo says he is certain that his opinion is relevant to this discussion, because otherwise, he wouldn't dare to interrupt someone as highly ranked as Marlen. Xylo is out of line here, but Marlen can respect the confidence it takes to talk like that in front of him, so he asks Xylo what it is he wants to say, and Xylo suggests they should investigate the middleman for the adventurers, the guild. The representative of the Adventurers Guild is a man named Lydio Sodric, and he runs both the guild and the shell town surrounding it, so that's going to be their first stop. After the details are finalized, Xylo heads out and eventually meets up with Venetim. Venetim nervously asks if everything worked out in there, and at first, Xylo doesn't know what he means, so Venetim explains that he is worried that they might have given them a new punishment for what happened, but Xylo tells him that's not the case. The meeting was pretty fair all around, so nothing bad is going to happen to them. However, Venetim still looks quite worried. Meanwhile, Lydio is meeting with Shishibao and Bujim, and he can't believe they failed the mission they were given. Shishibao says it's not her fault because dealing with a dragon wasn't part of the plan, and furthermore, she says she doesn't want to work with Bujim anymore. She calls him a complete amateur and tells Lydio that he should get rid of him as soon as possible. However, Lydio informs her that Bujim is one of the strongest people he has ever met. A few days ago, 10 adventurers ended up picking a fight with Bujim in a gambling house, and by the end of it, Bujim had killed every single one of them without even breaking a sweat. He tells Shishibao that if she's so concerned about Bujim being an amateur, then she just needs to teach him how to be a pro, and she can't argue with that, but she says she wants a pay increase. Lydio asks her if she really thinks she deserves a raise after such a spectacular failure, and Shishibao gets offended by his tone, so she attempts to attack him, but before she could do so, Lydio's little sister, Iri, steps forward and threatens her with a knife. Shishibao is still mad, but she knows she wouldn't be able to beat Iri easily, so she backs off. Lydio tells Iri to stand down for now. He then grabs a bag of coins and tosses it to Shishibao to calm her down, but he reminds her that unless she completes the mission as instructed, she's not getting the rest of her money. Just then, Bujim speaks up and mentions that he would also like a pay increase because he has taken a liking to the author of this book and he would like to buy a few more. The next morning, Xylo heads to the cafeteria for breakfast and meets up with Dada and Joyce at one of the tables. He's surprised to see Joyce up this early, so he teased him and asked if his dragon kicked him out of the stables or something, and as a matter of fact, that's exactly what happened. Joyce's dragon, Neely, apparently got jealous that Joyce was looking at other dragons in the stables, so he's not allowed to ride her for a while, and he's really bummed out by it. Anyway, Dada asks Xylo where Tirida is since she's usually with him most of the day, but he says she's still asleep at the moment. and he kind of prefers it this way because there's something he doesn't want her to hear about. Dada already knows where this is going, since the fact that he doesn't want Tiarita to hear about this means he thinks it is probably dangerous, and the fact that Xylo is bringing it up here means he intends to ask Dada to do it. Xylo admits that Dada is right and explains that he wants to infiltrate the Adventurers Guild, which is why he needs Dada's help. Dada asks him why he can't just ask Rhino to do it since he used to be an adventurer, but Xylo informs him that Rhino is currently locked up, and even if he wasn't, he's too unpredictable to trust. Seeing that Dada really doesn't want to do this, Jace volunteers to help Xylo in Dada's place since he's got nothing better to do, but Xylo says he specifically needs Dada's expertise for this mission, so it has to be him. Dada reluctantly agrees to help, so Jace gets up to leave, but before he does, he warns Xylo not to go too hard on Dada because he's an incredible person. After all, he once gave up his arm to feed a starving dragon, and that's a sacrifice that Jace as a dragon lover respects with all his heart. After Jace is gone, Dada asks Xylo what the details of this plan are, and later that day, they both head out to meet with Kivia, who is dressed a bit differently today. The reason for this is because on the last mission, Xylo casually mentioned that Kivia always dresses like a man, so she wanted to prove him wrong. She asks if Xylo has anything bad to say about her outfit this time, but to her surprise, Xylo compliments her and says she looks like a proper noble woman, the kind who would have no shortage of eager suitors. Xylo's compliment made her really happy, but Kivia doesn't want to show it, so she suggests they should carry on with the plan. They still need to figure out what job they should use to hire adventurers, and Xylo thinks the most natural option would be demon hunting, but Dada informs him that that's more of a job for the military, so adventurers would stay away from his offer. Kivia then suggests they could say it's a job to take out some bandits, but while that may have worked if they were in a small village, Dada reminds her that this is a big city with tons of security, so bandits aren't really an issue here. Kivia asks Dada if he has any ideas then, and as a matter of fact, he's got the perfect story. Dada plans to tell people that Kivia is a married noble woman and Xylo is her affair partner, and that they are trying to hire someone to assassinate her husband so she can be with Xylo. On the day Dada was sentenced to be a hero, he was brought on trial just like Xylo was. He had committed over 1,000 acts of theft at this point, but the main reason he was brought before the court today is because of his recent escape attempt from the castle dungeon involving that dragon over there. Xylo is a little confused after hearing this because he doesn't understand why those are the only crimes he's being charged with when he literally attempted to kidnap the crown prince. The prince had come to him terrified and asked Dada to save him because he believed there was something strange going on in the royal family. However, the judge cut him off and yelled at him to stop spouting such baseless accusations. He says Dada's claim to have met the crown prince is fake, and his claim that the crown prince asked him for help is false as well. However, Dada refused to be gaslit and swore that he is certain that he met the crown prince because he could never forget how terrified he looked when asking for help. And the fact that he was desperate enough to ask a no-good piece of scum like Dada is proof enough that there really is something going on in the royal family. However, trying to get that point across to these idiots is like talking to a brick wall. Dada ends up getting pinned to the ground, and the judge would have liked to just sentence him to death and be over with it, but he received a request from the Central Noble Alliance to sentence him to be a hero instead. Back to the present, Xylo and Kivia are making their way towards the Adventurers Guild, but this place is even more run down than they expected it to be. Pretty much everyone here is doing at least one illegal thing, but Kivia has to ignore them for now since she's undercover. As they continue walking, Xylo asks Kivia why she chose to join the military of all places, because it makes no sense for some like her who's from a rich and powerful temple family to willingly put her life on the line for no reason. Kivia doesn't mind talking about it, so she explains that both her parents were priests who gained influence within the temple, and they used that influence to amass a lot of wealth, but not always in ethical ways. Kivia always hated that about her parents, so she wanted to make a name for herself as a knight outside their influence. As a matter of fact, she still has the first training sword she ever received from her uncle when she decided to become a knight, and part of the reason she's so close to him is because he has supported her dream of securing a future for herself with her own talent. Kivia then tells Xylo she has a question for him, and she's about to ask if his relationship with Frenchie is still serious, but just then, Dada shows up to inform them that he has finished scouting out the area. From what he saw, Lidio has around 20 soldiers guarding the place, which doesn't sound like a lot, but he's also got some children who look like tiny trained assassins. Xylo isn't surprised to hear this, since there have been rumors that the Adventurers Guild takes in orphans and trains them to be loyal assassins, but it still makes him sick. The plan is for Dada to kidnap Lidio while Xylo and Kivia cause a commotion inside, so they continue on their way to the guild. and Kivia hugs Xylo's arm to maintain their cover. But unfortunately, Lidio already knows they are here thanks to his little assassins. He is particularly worried about Xylo being here, but if the circumstances are right, he might be able to capture Xylo alive. The children promise to do their best to capture him, but just in case, Lidio tells them to contact Shishibao and Bujim as reinforcements, and to wake Dursumi up as well. Meanwhile, down at the reception desk, Kivia slams her hand down and requests to hire an assassin. The guild immediately falls silent with suspicion as she says this because there's no way that someone who wanted to hire a killer would say it out loud like that. Kivia does her best to sell the part of a love-struck noble woman, but that's really embarrassing to watch, and the receptionists don't seem to be buying it either. So Xylo is starting to think it might be easier to simply blow this place up to create a distraction for Dada. However, before they could do that, Frenchie and 2 of her bodyguards show up, and she's apparently well known here, so she vouches for Xylo and Kivia and has them come to a private room with her. Frenchie had apparently been undercover here for a while as an adventurer because she was trying to get to Lidio as well, but Xylo and Kivia showing up ruined her whole plan just when she was on the verge of earning Lidio's trust. In fact, as they speak, Lidio is probably having his subordinates prepare to take them out, and Frenchie is absolutely right because Lidio's troops have a literal machine aimed into the room. One of the little girls then knocks on the door as bait to lure them forward, but Xylo already knows exactly what's going on, so he readies his weapons, and as the machine guns fire, they all hit the floor. After a few seconds of firing, Kivia chops off the hand of the gunman, and as for the kids, they may be trained killers, but they are still just children, so Frenchie knees one in the face. Xylo uppercuts the other, and Frenchie's bodyguards drop a door on the last one. The kids are all still alive. Badly injured, but alive, however, the same can't be said for the gunman, because Xylo casually tosses him an explosive dagger, and it blows a hole through the building, revealing a lot more people below. And since there's no point in trying to be stealthy anymore, Xylo suggests they should just take out as many of these assassins as possible. Lidio is shocked by the way this all turned out since he didn't think they would be so aggressive. Eri suggests that he should probably retreat through the underground passage, but he says it will be easier to just slip out in all the chaos. So he asks Eri to call all the forces they have available at the moment. Shishibal apparently hired the Iron Whale group, so they should be a formidable addition to their forces, but he doubts they will make it here in time, so he's preparing for the worst. He wants to send every available adventurer at the aggressor, and though he didn't want to kill the one pacted with a goddess, as things stand right now, he has no choice but to have Xylo killed. In the meantime, he orders Eri to stay by his side, so she promises to do everything in her power to protect Lidio, even if it costs her her life, and Lidio is happy to hear that. A little too happy if you ask me. Meanwhile, outside, as the fight spills out onto the streets, Kivia rips her dress for better mobility and takes out her sword to fight. One of the adventurers charges at her, but she easily parries his attack, and then she goes low to target his shins. She then strikes him so hard that his shin guards are shattered, and after he collapses to the ground, she threatens to kill him if he doesn't surrender. Meanwhile, Xylo springboards off a shop canopy and jumps into the air to get a bird's eye view of the battlefield, and from the sky, he spots a sniper aiming right at Kivia, so he takes him out with an explosion that levels the top of the building. This results in several tons of debris crashing down on the streets below, and Kivia yells at Xylo for causing too much collateral damage, but he tells her he's just blocking off paths so Lidio can't call for reinforcements. She wants to argue with him, but all of a sudden, she is attacked by a bunch of Lidio's child assassins, and they may be weaker than a normal swordsman. There are a lot of them, so Kivia is starting to get overwhelmed. Frenchie steps in to help her, and since outright killing the children would be a little too much, she goes with the next best option and electrocutes him with her Violet Lightning Sacred Seal before punting the child away. The battle carries on like this for a while longer, so Frenchie asks Xylo if he has a plan because they can't keep this up forever. But Xylo says the plan is to cause an even bigger commotion until Lidio is forced to show himself. And as far as plans go, that's one of the worst ones Frenchie has ever heard. Just then, a group of adventurers known as the Hunters shows up, and their leader proudly declares that they are here to stop Xylo and the others, but the group finds it hard to take them seriously since they straight up look like a bunch of drunk idiots. The leader takes offense to this and orders his men to get into positions to attack, so they all pull out their lightning staves, and they may be idiots, but there's nothing scarier than an idiot with a gun. That said, they happen to have terrible aim, so the shots are going all over the place, and it turns out that the blasters they are using aren't even real blasters. They are just leftover fireworks from the festival. It's a little annoying, but it should be easy for Kivia and Frenchie to handle, So Xylo leaves this to them and heads up to the rooftop to scope things out. Unfortunately, as soon as he is in the air, he comes face to face with a machine gunner who immediately opens fire. So Xylo is forced to do some quick aerial maneuvers before throwing another explosive dagger that blows up the roof. Xylo then jumps back to the ground, and on the way down, he makes sure to stomp on the leader of the adventurer party. The adventurers are all on the back foot of this battle, so their defeat is pretty much guaranteed. But just when it looked like everything was over, Xylo notices something big heading his way. So he quickly dodges as a troll demon comes crashing down. They all realize that Lidio must have been keeping this thing as a pet, and if they have to deal with a monster like this now, they might be in trouble. The adventurers all perk up and resume their attack because they think they stand a chance now. But just as they were approaching, Xylo felt the presence of a familiar little goddess, and to his dismay, he finds out that Teorita and the others are here. She is upset that Xylo left on a mission without her, so she plans to join in on the fun right away. And the knight who was in charge of keeping Teorita from finding out about this is just shaking his head because he knows he's going to get in so much trouble for this. The adventurers are a little worried since they weren't expecting more people to show up, and Xylo warns them to surrender immediately because if they fight the rest of his team, they aren't going to be spared. Meanwhile, Lidio is making his way out of the city because he knows Xylo only caused that commotion because he wanted to lure him out, and he doesn't plan to fall for such obvious bait. As he is making his way through the back alleys, King tries to introduce himself to the adventurers and calmly tells them to surrender immediately, but they all refuse. So he gives up on sparing them and opens a box of bombs he brought to blow a bunch of them to smithereens. The adventurers with crossbows open fire on King, but Tatsuya steps in and blocks all the arrows before leaping down to take them out. Jace then joins in and begins laying waste to as many adventurers as he can get his hands on, but he makes sure to spare the horses because at the end of the day, he's still an animal lover. As for the troll, Xylo, Kivia, and Frenchie are still trying to deal with it, and the only one with enough firepower to take it out is Xylo, so Kivia tells him she'll distract the monster while he gets in position to take it out. Xylo hears her loud and clear, so he runs over to get Teorita, and she eagerly jumps into his arms because she is glad Xylo is finally acknowledging her usefulness in battle. While flying through the air, Teorita activates her ability and brings a rain of swords down upon the troll, and to finish it off, she creates one final sword which Xylo launches at the troll, blowing it to pieces. Now that the battle is over, Xylo thanks Teorita for her help, but she tells him that's not good enough for her. She wants to receive proper praise from him, and since Xylo has warmed up to her a lot, he gives her another head pat as a reward. All the adventurers look on in horror as their trump card goes up in flames, and at this point, they are left with no choice but to surrender. Meanwhile, Lidio and Irie are making their escape hidden in the crowd of fleeing citizens, but Lidio gets distracted by the sight of the destruction of everything he worked hard to maintain, and as a result, he gets separated from Irie by the crowd. That little bit of distance was more than enough for Dada to swoop in and hold a blade to Lidio's neck, and he apologizes for doing this, but Xylo pretty much forced him into it. He promises not to hurt Lidio if he comes quietly, and Lidio realizes there's no chance of him escaping this, so he gives up, and within moments, Dada had taken him away. Meanwhile, Bujim and Shishibao are currently on the city wall, watching all the chaos unfold, and though they don't know exactly what happened, Shishibao thinks it's fair to assume that Lidio is either dead or captured after something like that. The whale party leader is disappointed to hear that because he came all this way only for his employer to get captured, and he absolutely refuses to work without pay, so he says this is as far as he goes. Shishibao can't blame him for refusing to go, but she still hasn't gotten paid yet, so she plans to head to the guild to collect her money. She asks Bujim what he plans to do, so he tells her he's going to go save Lidio. She's surprised to hear that coming from him, but he says it's the polite thing to do since he does owe Lidio a lot. However, just as he was about to leave, he receives a message conveyed by a demon mosquito, and apparently, he has just been given new orders to abandon Lidio. He then turns to Whale and asks him if he's willing to accept a new job under him. As he says this, a group of demons emerges from the shadows, and initially, they are hostile towards Whale and Shishibao, but Bujim yells at them for being rude to his friends and decapitates one of the demons as punishment. Shishibao always thought there was something off about Bujim, but she never would have guessed that he's a demon. Bujim doesn't see what the problem is because he already told her that he will pay for their services, and from what he has learnt, that should be enough motivation to convince her. Shishibao may still be on the fence, but Whale has already made up his mind, so he starts calling Bujim boss and asks him what he needs to do. Bujim explains that his orders are to erase all connections between himself and Lidio, which pretty much means he needs to destroy everything here, and Whale says he can handle that. Bujim then addresses Shishibao and says he owes her for teaching him how to be a mercenary, so he would rather not kill her. She asks Bujim if he's telling her to turn against humanity, and he replies that that's exactly what he's asking of her. He learned from Lidio that humans are more concerned with protecting themselves and their families than protecting the species as a whole, so it makes sense that she would prioritize her own safety over the collective human race, and Shishibao realizes that Bujim is right about her, so she reluctantly agrees. Back at the guild, all the remaining adventurers have been rounded up, and their situation isn't as bad as you would expect, because all King wants them to do is to atone for their misdeeds by serving him. And after the crushing defeat they suffered, the adventurers are too scared to disobey. As for Lidio, he's been tied up in the corner of the room, and they are trying to get him to spill the beans on who is behind this whole operation. Lidio asserts that he has no information about his employer, but Xylo isn't buying it. So he grabs Lidio by the hair and says he's willing to cut a deal with him. Hearing this, Lidio relents and says he's willing to cooperate if they can guarantee the safety of his little brothers and sisters. Xylo assumes he must be talking about those child assassins, and Lidio explains that those guys are the most important people in his life, so as long as they will be spared, he's willing to talk. Xylo agrees to the deal, and Kivia is about to yell at him for making a deal without asking for permission first, but he asks her if she would rather hunt down those kids and execute them one by one in front of Lidio, because that's probably the only other way to get him to talk. Kivia realizes that Xylo is right, so she lets him handle the rest. Lidio starts talking and reveals that one day, he was approached by someone who called themselves a coexister, and he made an offer for Lidio to help them. Though, it wasn't really much of a choice. It was either he obey the coexister, or he and everyone he cares about would be killed on the spot. He adds that the man who met him said his name was Mahazel Zelkov, but Kivia scoffs and says that's not possible because Mahazel is the name of a saint, but then she comes to a terrifying revelation. She was about to say something, but just then. The guild came under fire from one of Whale's artillery blasts, and while everyone is running for cover, Lidio manages to slip away through a secret passage. As he is making his way through the tunnels, he ends up coming across Eerie, and he's really happy to see that she's still okay. He asks her where the other children are, and she tells him they are all nearby. But just as Lidio breathed a sigh of relief because his family is still alive, Eerie stabs her hand straight through his chest. In that moment, Lidio realizes that this isn't Eerie, and the demon lord possessing her, Spriggan, tells him he's correct. It is simply using her body and brain at the moment, and when it said the other children were nearby, it never said they were still alive. Lidio falls into despair at the realization that the family he works so hard to protect has been destroyed, and a moment later, he too is killed. Spriggan then turns to the others and tells them that they need to speed up the timeline of their plan, so they are to destroy the city, kill every single human here, and above all else, ensure that they kill Teorita. Bujim has no objections to the plan, but he asks if he can have a bit of time because he would like to give Lidio a proper burial since he considered him a friend. However, he is told that there is no time for that, and he has no right to refuse her orders because Spriggan is in charge of him. So Bujim apologizes to Lidio's corpse and thanks him for buying books for him. After all the chaos has settled down, Kivia and Frenchie lay out everything they managed to gather from the guild, but there's not much since most of it went up in flames. Among the remains, one item in particular seems to catch Kivia's attention, so she picks it up, and Frenchie immediately recognizes it as some sort of contract receipt. Hearing that makes Kivia wonder if Lidio was really telling the truth about Mahazel Zelkov, but she can't confirm it because they have no idea where Lidio is now. Frenchie tells Kivia that they should probably give up on capturing that man because he is either far, far away from this town, or he died in all the chaos. While those two are talking, we see Venetum approach one of the guards to ask for the release of one of the sentenced heroes. The guard rejects his request since he was given strict orders not to let Reno out, but Venetum tells him the situation has changed, which is why they need Reno. He also has an official release form ready, and at first, the guard is skeptical that it's a genuine release form, but Venetum points to the seal on the paper as proof of its authenticity. He also tells the guard that he's free to go confirm it himself, and Venetum is so convincing that the guard immediately believes him. But first, he wants to go check with his chain of command. At the same time, Xylo, Teorita, King, and Jace are all sitting together for lunch, and Teorita begins complaining because she's sick and tired of being stuck in this fort all day. She says he wants to go on an outing, and hearing this, King tells her that he knows the perfect place. He suggests that Teorita should go to the local museum because there are countless beautiful pieces of art there, but Jace thinks that's way too boring, so he tells Teorita that if she wants to have fun, then she should go see the ocean and maybe do some aerial hunting while she's at it. Xylo reminds Jace that only dragons are capable of doing stuff like that, so it doesn't really apply to Teorita. And either way, it doesn't matter because she won't be going on any outings anytime soon. He reminds Teorita that there are still people after her life, so there's no way they will get permission to go out at a time like this. However, just then, Kivia approaches them and says she's actually willing to approve an outing, but only on the condition that they don't go any farther than the temple. This is terrific news for Teorita, but Xylo is a bit confused since this is out of character for Kivia, so he asks her if there's any particular reason for it. However, she says she just wanted to improve Teorita's mood a little, nothing more. She then tells Xylo to inform Priest Marlin of his outing with Teorita, and this catches Xylo off guard since he assumes Kivia would be the one overseeing the outing. However, she says she's too busy. A little while later, Xylo and Teorita are out in town, and Teorita is absolutely loving all the attention she's getting from the people here. They are all asking her for an autograph because there's a superstition that a goddess's signature wards off misfortune. A few old ladies later bring a tray of cookies for Teorita as thanks for everything she does in the fight against the demons, and Teorita is very pleased because this is the kind of appreciation she has been craving. But Xylo quickly confiscates the cookies as a precaution since even though they are probably fine, he still needs to test them for poison to make sure they are safe. While he's doing that, he happens to overhear two little girls talking about him, and they seem to have quite a positive opinion of him since they are calling him a legendary demon lord hunter, and he's surprised that people know about him. Just then, Marlin comes out of the temple and tells Xylo that he has earned himself quite a few fans thanks to his heroic actions. Xylo had assumed that no one would care about his achievements because he is a penal hero, but it turns out that slaying 3 demon lords does wonders for your PR. Marlin has also started to see Xylo in a positive light, mostly because Kivia has said a lot of good things about him. Marlin then goes on to talk about how much he cares about Kivia, and that if anyone were to hurt or betray her, then they would have to deal with him. On that note, Marlin is well aware of how Kivia feels about Xylo, and he's also aware that Xylo already has a fiancé, so he wanted to discuss a few things with him. But his sentence was cut short as a warning bell suddenly rings, and everyone immediately begins to panic because they know what that means. The city is currently under attack. While all the forces are being rallied to defend the city, Kivia heads into the document room, hoping to gather some intel while everyone else is preoccupied. However, it looks like she wasn't the only one who had that idea because when she walks in, she finds Venetum looking through the files. She demands to know why Venetum is here since this room is off-limits to people without high military clearance. Venetum feigns ignorance and pretends he had no idea that this was a restricted area, and Kivia knows he's lying, but she's technically not supposed to be here either, so she doesn't make a big deal out of it. Venetum agrees to leave, and he asks Kivia to keep this little mishap a secret between the two of them, because he would rather not have to explain himself. After he's gone, Kivia takes a look at the book Venetum was reading, and it raises quite a few concerns for her. A little while later, Xylo comes to meet up with Venetum in one of the towers, but to his unpleasant surprise, he finds Rhino here as well. Rhino congratulates Xylo on the impressive number of achievements he has amassed for himself in such a short time. He also greets Teorita and introduces himself as the team's artillery, but she's a bit cautious of him because she can tell that there's something wrong with him. Xylo is starting to really regret getting Reno released from jail because Reno is pissing him off. Anyway, moving on to the plan. Venetum explains that the tower on the coast has already been taken over, and Xylo is really disappointed to hear that because that tower was a huge part of their coastal defenses. That said, he has no plans of trying to reclaim it because he can tell that it's a trap. The demons have heavy artillery on their side, and judging by the wind speed today, Rhino is sure that if they wanted to, the demon side could probably destroy a decent section of the city, but they haven't done so yet, meaning they are waiting for something. Xylo asks Venetum what the official orders are, so Venetum relays the message saying that the heroes are going to be forced to defend the port. All the other knights were sent up to the capital to defend it, so the heroes will have to defend the port with their lives until reinforcements arrive. Xylo is annoyed and grabs Venetum by the shirt because he knows there will be no reinforcements coming to help them. After all, the higher-ups only care about themselves, but he's not about to let this play out in disaster, so they prepare to do everything they can to win. King gathers his people and tells them that he wants to make sacred seal defenses for this fortress, just like last time. Xylo is surprised that King managed to get all the adventurers to follow him so easily, but after the guild was destroyed, they are just glad to still have a job to do. King even apparently promised them salaries and titles, but hearing that, Xylo is starting to get worried because there's no way King can follow through on that promise. That said, that's a problem for another day. So Xylo decides to leave things as they are for now and they move on with setting up base. And later that night, Xylo prepares some stew for everyone and offers a bowl to Tatsuya. Tatsuya takes the bowl, but then he starts trying to use his hands to eat it, which ends up wasting most of the food. Just then, Rhino walks up, and he is covered head to toe in awesome gear. Tirida has never seen anything like it before, so Xylo explains that it is a naval artillery SEAL compound. Rhino is a little disappointed since he thought they would call them to meet back up here, yet he sees no sign of Tsav or Jace. Xylo explains that Sav is still currently being treated for his destroyed arm, so they likely won't be seeing him for the rest of the day. And as for Jace, Xylo would have loved to have him on the team, but the higher-ups seem to think that a dragon is too dangerous to take into battle in an urban area, but Venetim will figure something out. From the way things look, it's just going to be the 4 of them here, but Rhino says he has a suggestion to fix their staffing issues. He suggests that they should just blow up a portion of the wall, because once the inner city is exposed, then those higher-ups will be forced to take action to ensure the monsters don't make it too far. Tirida is stunned by what she just heard, but Xylo is already aware of Rhino's complete lack of good morals, so he flatly denies his request because he has a much better plan. The higher-ups may not care about people, but they definitely care about their profits, so if they lose millions after their ships are targeted, then they will be forced to act, and that's where Rhino comes in. A little while later, Venetim walks in, and he informs Kivia that it looks like one of their large sacred seal ships has been destroyed, so he is requesting permission to use their dragon. At first, she has a hard time believing that what Venetim just said is true, but a moment later, a knight comes running in to inform her that the sacred seal ship really is on fire. The Knight Order even sent a formal request for backup, so Kivia ends up approving Venetim's request. Venetim thanks her and tells her to give his highest regards to Marlin, but hearing him mention her uncle, she suddenly flies into a rage because she has been grappling with the possibility that her uncle may be one of the demon worshippers, but she desperately wants to believe that's not true. Seeing that she's upset, Venetim backtracks and says he didn't mean any disrespect, but he just has some extra security suggestions for the underground waterways. Venetim kind of made up that last bit about needing to protect the waterways, but it turns out that it was a good idea on his part because the demons had planned to sneak a majority of their forces in through the waterways, but thanks to Kivia's chain lightning staff blockade, no demons have managed to break through. But unfortunately, Budjim happened to be there as well, and while he appreciates how good of a plan this was, he's still got a job to do, so he slaughters every single soldier. Later on, the demons have made it into the city, and the news of the massacre in the waterways has been shared, so Marlin used it as an opportunity to gain the military's cooperation. So now, he has command over an extremely large domain, and Kivia assumes this must be proof that her uncle isn't one of the demon worshippers because otherwise, he wouldn't have gathered such a large force. However, as he is preparing to leave, Kivia hears him say the name Mezerhail under his breath, and that sets off alarm bells because that's the name associated with the demon worshippers. So Kivia's worst nightmare may yet turn out to be true.